discussing on the bottom of 10b. Today's Daf Yomi is Daf Yud Aleph, dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, and this Eis Tzara, the Chodesh Tov, Mishin Nechnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha, it should be a Yeshua for all of us, a Segula. So we're on the bottom of 10b, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara has said the position of Reish Lakish that a katana and a minor girl cannot acquire something via a courtyard, and she doesn't have the law that she acquires something in 4 amos. And the Gemara and Rabbi Yochanan argued and said that she can. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Anesh said that she can. She can acquire something by it being put into her courtyard. And the Gemara said, well, what's the nature of the dispute? That one is other position that the law of a courtyard is learned from the law of agency, and a minor doesn't have the law of agency. And the other position is that the law of the courtyard is learned from the law of an extension of her hand, and so she has an extension of her hand, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan is of the position. Must be that Rabbi Yochanan is of the position that a courtyard is an extension of her hand. So the Reish Lakish must be saying that it's not an extension of her hand. Is there even a position, says the Gemara in the bottom of 3b, that it's bottom of 10b, 3 lines on the bottom, is there even a position that a courtyard is not the law, that your courtyard can acquire something if something falls into your courtyard, that it doesn't come from an extension of the hand? But didn't we learn with respect to, but don't we know the halacha as it relates to respect to a get, that if a woman is being given a divorce, yada, you could give it into her hand and she's divorced. Only yada, I only know if it's given into her hand. Gaga, chatzera, karpifa, minayin. I don't know if it's just placing it into her courtyard or her rooftop. Tamomar v'nasan mikol makom, meaning to say that if you put it into her hand, it's the same thing. So the Gemara says, you're right. Well, with respect to get, with respect to a divorce, with respect to a get, everybody would agree that the law of a divorce is derived from, that the law of a courtyard is derived from her hand. But where are they arguing with respect to a lost object? Mar Savar, that one is on the position on top of 11a, Yalfina Metzia Vinget, that one is on the position that we learn out the law of a lost object from a get. And so therefore, just like a get, the courtyard is an extension of your hand. Also, if the lost object is in your courtyard, it's an extension of your hand. Umar Savar will Yalfina Metzia Vinget. It says we don't derive from there, therefore it can only be derived from agency. Or alternatively, another way to derive the fact that Reish Lakish says it's not learned out from hand, and is from the fact that we could say, no, the dispute is Bekatana Koyama lo Pligi, the Alfina Mitzia Maget. By a minor girl, everybody says that we learn out a lost object from a get, and that just like she can acquires the get by it being in her courtyard, so too she acquires the lost object. But what we're talking about here is that Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, even though they say that they're arguing about a young girl, they're really arguing about a young boy. That's what they're arguing about. That's where we don't say we learn that from a courtyard. And that's what we're arguing about. One says we learn out the law of a young boy from the law of a young girl, and one says we don't. Or alternatively, or maybe Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are not arguing that Reish Lakish says his law with respect to a lost object that a minor girl can acquire if it's in her courtyard, and Rabbi Yochanan, she cannot acquire with respect to a lost object in her courtyard. And Rabbi Yochanan says it with respect to a get, that she can get it if it's in her divorce. Or alternatively, that Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish is saying his law by a minor girl, by a minor boy, and Rabbi Yochanan says his law by a minor girl, that the minor girl can acquire, but not the minor boy. Okay, so now we're up to the next Mishnah on 11a. Says the Mishnah, Ra Osan Ra'itzin Achar Metzia. If he sees a group of people running after a lost object, or Achar Tzvi Shavur, or after a tzvi is usually translated as a deer, Sometimes people say it's a gazelle. I don't really know. I'm not really sure of the difference. I know they're two different animals, but I don't really know the difference. But the commentaries point out that these are things that multiple people run after. Or achar gozolos, when it's a deer, multiple people run after one of them. Or if you see after pigeons, that they're running after the birds as a group. Shalot parchu. So a person's running after either a lost object or a gazelle or a deer or a group of birds that can't fly, and they're running into his field. So Reuven has a field. There's a deer in it, and a whole bunch of people are running into his deer. Here, you need a Gemara right here. So we're in 11a. So a whole bunch of people are running into his courtyard. So and running into his field to catch the birds. And he says, Zachtali, Sadai. He says, my field, they're in my field. My field has it. They're in my field. My field has it. Thank you, Moshe. A big, big mitzvah. Please, for my mother. Moshe has prepared you a bagel. Okay, so he says, thank you, Moshe. He says, my field has acquired it. Zochtali Sadai. Then we're going to say under those circumstances. So under those circumstances, Zochtalo. Since he screams out, my field has acquired it, and they're in his field has acquired it. And that's because the field was broke. That's because the deer was broken, or the birds can't fly. But let's say let's say the deer is running in the normal manner, and the deers, you don't say deers, the deer know how to run fast. And then he screams out, Oshaya Gozos Mafrichen, or the birds are flying, and he says, Zochtuli Sadai. He says, oh, I want my field to acquire this deer or these birds that are flying over my property. And he has said nothing. See, I asked a trick question to our son Roy. He was giving a shiur on Wednesday night about the laws of Purim and Shushan Purim. And he said, and if in Jerusalem, if you're in Jerusalem, you have to keep Purim on the 15th day of Adar, not the 14th day. So I said to him, what if you're only in Jerusalem in a helicopter on the 15th day? So does that mean that you're in Jerusalem? He didn't answer my question. But we see from here that if the bird is flying through and it's not stopping, he says your field can't acquire it. So I'm saying it's related. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So it says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, when do we say that you're able to acquire the deer when it has got a broken leg and it's in your field? That's only when he's standing next to the field. He's only able to acquire it when he's standing next to the field. If he's not next to the field, he can't acquire it. So the Gemara says, why? So the Gemara says, why do you need to be standing next to the field? Why? Even if he's not standing there, let his field acquire it. It's like a courtyard. Your courtyard can acquire even if without your knowledge. Why does he need to be standing next to the field in order to acquire it? I don't think do we have this law in American law that your courtyard can acquire something without your knowledge? If let's say we have a case of let's say you have a I don't know what would be the example? I don't know, a bird, a very rare bird lands down in your property and it's not protected, and now it's there, and now it's in your courtyard, but you have no knowledge that it's there. Do you own that bird? So in American law? Okay, well, we don't know. We can look this up. And the Gemara says, well, Hani Mili, when do we say that your courtyard can acquire something without your knowledge, or you don't need to be next to it? That's only in a specific type of case. What's the case? Hani Mili, that's only talking about a case, where the courtyard is locked up, it's guarded, it's protected. But let's say the courtyard is not locked up, if he's standing next to it, then he acquires it. But if he's not standing there, he doesn't acquire it. So for the Gemara, and from where do you say that if the courtyard is not protected, What's your source for this idea that the courtyard only, if the courtyard is not protected, you only acquires if you're standing next to it? I'll tell you why, says the Gemara. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, are you only be'ir? Let's say you're standing in a city. Let's say you're standing in your city. The Omer, while you're standing in the city, you say, Yodei Anisha Omer Sheyeshli B'Sadeh. He says, I know, while you're in the city, you're standing in Washington, D.C., and you got property in Beltsville, where they have farms, right? Only. He says you're standing in the city, and you say, I know that the crops that I have in the field, polim shachachuhu. I know that the crops that the workers there forgot, and I don't want that to be considered forgotten. Lo yeh shechacha. I don't want that to be forgotten. I don't want that to, the law of shecha. What's the law of shecha? The law of shecha is if you forgot crops in your field, you have to leave that for the poor person. But in this case, you're making a declaration that I know that if the workers forget it, it will not be considered shecha. It will not be considered like it was forgotten. You make this declaration that I remember, even though the workers forgot to bring it, it's not forgotten. I might think in that. So basically, what is he doing? He's standing there in this city, and the workers were supposed to bring him the crops, and they didn't. And he says it's not considered forgotten. I might think the laws of shecha don't apply to that. It's not considered forgotten. If you forget the omer in the field, that if you forgot in the field, v'lo ba'ir, but not if you forgot it in the city. The law of shecha does not apply to the city; only applies in the field. Alma lo have shecha. So we see from here, it's not considered to be shecha. That if the owner will go back, this will not be the law of shecha because there's no shecha in the city, and so therefore the Gemara says, "Wait 1 second." This doesn't make any sense. Hagufa kasha, the whole price doesn't make any sense. We have to understand it. First of all, Amras Yachol Shecha. You might think the laws of Shecha don't apply. Alma Have Shecha. That implies that this case is an example of where you forgot it. V'nastav Gemara Besada, and then the Gemara says, the answer is Besada v'Shachachta v'lo ba'ir. So that means to say Alma Lo Have Shecha, that it's not Shecha. So which is it? So therefore, the Gemara says, Elav hachikamer. This is what it means. Besada, if you're in the field, shakuach meikaro, that if you're in the field and if he forgot it even before his workers, shakuach meikaro have shichacha. Then we say it's shichacha. Zachar ul besov shakuach. But let's say that the owner of the field remembers it, and then in the end it's forgotten by the workers. Then we are going to say if the worker remembered it, but not the workers, if the employer remembered it, but not the workers, that's not considered shecha. My time, but the kiven the kai gabe since he's standing next to it, it's his courtyard, and he acquired it. So therefore, we're going to say that since his field is like a courtyard, and so therefore he acquired the ones that were forgotten. But if it would be in the city, I feel zachar or basof shachuch. Meaning, say the Gemara is saying that the distinction is that if they forgot it if the workers forgot it while he was in the field, then since he's next to it, he acquired it right away. But if they forgot it while he was in the city, he's not there to acquire it, and so therefore he's not acquiring it. And so we see from here that if a person's standing next to the courtyard that's not watched, he's going to be able to acquire it because the field is like a courtyard that's not watched. And so therefore, if the owner of the field is standing next to the field and he says that this thing that the workers forgot is mine, we're going to say that he's acquired it. So anyway, we see from here that you can only acquire something. This is the proof that if it's a courtyard that's not watched, you only acquire it if your courtyard only acquires it if you're standing next to it. Gemara says that's not a proof. Maybe this whole law of shechacha is just a specific verse that's telling us. Maybe it's not a logical extension. It's just a specific law by the laws of forgetting, and and not anything to do with the courtyard. Why? Because what is the verse? The besada ne'ave shecha, that if you forget something while you're in the field, and he still remembers while he's in the field, then it's considered forgotten. But if he's standing in the city and he remembers that he forgot it with his workers, then it doesn't apply the law of shecha. And so therefore we're going to change the text of the brisa. And so we're going to say, I might think that it's not, that'll be shecha even if you're in the city. And so therefore we say that's what the brisa is telling us, that in the city, if you're in the city, the law of shecha does apply only, but not if you're in the field. And Amakra, lo tashuv kachto, a rabbo shecha sayer. You might think that the law of shecha doesn't apply while you're in the city. So it tells us that even if you're in the city, you can't go back to your field to take the omer. And so therefore you can't understand the brisa as simple, and you can't bring a proof for it. The Gemara says, how can you say from the pasuk lo tashuv kachto to say that the laws of shecha even apply in the city? I mean, by the way, don't we need it to teach us a prohibition, lulav, to teach us that you're not allowed, that if you forgot something, you're not allowed to go back to get it? The Gemara says, no. Because the verse could have said, you shall not take it. My lo tashuv. Why did it say the words do not return? To go say that if you forgot in the city, you still can't go back. The laws of shecha apply. The Gemara says, but don't we need it like we learned in the following Mishnah, that we learned in this Mishnah? What does the Mishnah tell us? As we learned in the Mishnah in Peah, this is now the 3 days in a row we've had a citation from the Mishnah in Peah, that the laws of shecha say that, let's say a person begins to collect the crops in the field, and he forgets one bundle, or at the end of the he starts the next row, but he forgot one row. He forgot something at the end of the previous row. Shalafanav ain't shecha. That if it's in front of him, if the row of crops is in front of him, then the laws of shecha don't apply. And he can still collect it. Shalacharav, but if it's behind him, yesh shecha. Then the laws of shecha apply. Because he's not allowed to go back. That's what the law of shecha is teaching us. You can't go back to collect us, which means kol shuv b'bal tashuv. Anytime where it's returning, that's the law of shecha. But if you're not returning, it's not shecha. So we see from our Mishnah that the verse lo tashuv is to teach us this law of shecha, and it can't be to teach us this extra law of going back from the city. So Amar Ravashi, Amar Kra, no, the pasuk says yeah. So we have a different verse. The pasuk says in the verse, it says you have to leave it for the ger yatom v'almana yiyeh l'rabot shecha seir. That's teaching us that even if you're in the city, it applies. And Kain Amar Ua, and so too Ua says the following. So now going back to the law, basically we said that the law of shecha is not a proof. So the Gemara now brings other Amoraim who say that there's a distinction between whether or not your courtyard could apply if you're standing next to it, or you're not standing next to it. So Ua also says that if you find the lost object, and he says, if there's a deer running through your field, and he says my field should acquire it, when do we say that you acquire the deer that's running through your field? When he's standing next to the field, meaning say if it's a field that's not watched or protected, you have to stand next to it in order for your field to acquire. You have to be standing next to it. So the Gemara challenges the position of Ula. Again, what's the position of Ula? That your field only acquires if you're standing next to it. The Gemara challenges Eisvei Rabbi Abba Ula from the following incident. Now you probably remember this incident, a famous story on a ship, because it appears already in the tractate Kedushin. So he added in Kedushin. So these rabbis were on the ship. Again, what are we challenging? We're challenging the idea that your field only acquires something when you're standing next to it, if it's an unwatched field. So there was an incident there. Rabbi Gamliel and the elders were coming on a ship. So Amar Rabbi Gamliel. Now the rabbis were afraid. Rabbi Gamliel was afraid that the people in his home would be eating from untithed crops. He has to give the tithe first, or else the people will sin in his household. So he wants to tithe, but he's on the ship. So how is he going to tithe? So Rabbi Gamliel they were coming on the ship. And so it says Rabbi Gamliel taught, he says, Isur Shani Atid Lamud, He says, Natun Yoshua. Rabbi Gamliel says, this tithe that I'm going to eventually give to the Levite is going to be given to Yoshua. Says this tithe that I'm eventually going to give, that I'm going to take from his crops, is given to Yoshua. Thereby, he's tithing his crops. So Yoshua is a Levi. Umukomo muskarlo, and the place is rented to him. We'll have to remember why that is. The Isur acher shani atid lamud, and the next tithe, that next 10% that I'm going to measure to give to the poor, Natun Akiva ben Yosef. Rabbi Gamliel says, I'm giving it to Rabbi Akiva because Rabbi Akiva was in charge of collecting the tithes for the poor. And the place where it is, it's rented. They weren't standing next to his field. And so we see from here, how are they able to acquire it? I mean, to say that you could, that we're saying that you could transfer something even if the owner is not there. So how could Ula say that your field acquires something only when you're standing next to it? I guess we have to assume that it was a field, that it was similar to the field in the Mishnah, that it was unwatched. So let me just say one second. Let me just give a little context. The only way you could acquire something, the Gemara's assumption about at this point is that if you want to transfer some, let's say, a movable object to somebody, that the way to do it is you could rent out the field to them. Because normally, in order to get a movable object, you have to pick it up. That's how you acquire it. Like you want to go into the store and buy an apple, you have to pick it up. But you want to buy 1,000 apples from somebody, how are you going to do it? You're not going to pick up the 1,000 apples. So you rent out the courtyard to him, and that you could do by a contract. You don't have to be there. And then you acquire everything else in it. That's how we get to Chametz on Pesach. And so we're proving from here that you don't need to be standing next to the courtyard in order for Rabbi Gamliel to give it to Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva. So this is a question on Ula. It says you need to be standing next to the courtyard in order to acquire it. Follow that? You got that, Neve? You want me to repeat it? I'm going to repeat it for you. Okay, so basically we have a position of Ula. Ula had given the position that in order to acquire, for your courtyard or your field to acquire something, you need to be standing next to it. If you're not standing, that there is an idea that your courtyard can acquire something, but he said you need to be standing next to the courtyard. The Gemara challenges this from a story where Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva are on a boat, and Rabbi Gamliel wants to take a tithe from his crops, and he give it to Rabbi Yeshua as a Levi and Rabbi Akiva to watch for the poor. And he says, I'm renting you my space in my field and giving you the tithe. But they're on the boat, so they're not next to it. So this is a challenge to Ula's position that you need to be standing next to it. That's the basic question. That a courtyard can transfer something. We see that the courtyard can transfer something, even though they can transfer the ownership of the movable objects, even though you're not next to it. This is how we, by the way, one of the ways in which we sell the chametz to the Gentile on the eve of Pesach. We rent them out space in our house, and we put the chametz in that space. And so therefore, they're acquiring all the chametz in that space. We rent out our closet or whatever. That's how we're giving them all the space. So the Gentile doesn't need to be standing next to our property. The Gentile's not standing next to our property. The Gentile's you could buy the chametz of somebody in Japan by just renting out their closet, even if you're here. I had a question, Harold.
But on the other hand, he's not standing next to it. He's on the ship and there's something here, and he's nowhere, and something makes it. But he never is there.
So does he need the knowledge? The Gemara is going to bring up that possibility. So the Gemara is going to explore like down your road. So let's see what they say first here. So Amrle, when Ula hears this question against him from Rabbi Abba from the incident of Rabbi Gamliel on the ship, his response was dismissive. He says, "Dami Rabbanan Kedelo Gamri in Shishmaita." He says, this question that Rabbi Abba is asking, He seems to me like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like he never studied anything. But he didn't explain more. Gilasi Surah, when Rabbi Abba came to Surah, Amaru Hachi Amar Ula Vachu Svise. He said, this is what Ula said. And then I challenged him. Amar Yahume Rabbanan. So there was one of the rabbis there who said to Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Gamliel Metaltli Agav Mekarki Hiknoah. No, you thought that he was acquiring it. You thought Rabbi Gamliel was transferring it to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua through the law of an acquisition called courtyard, chotzer. That if something's in your courtyard, you could acquire it. No, there's another way. There's another way you could acquire it, and this is called agav, kinyan agav. This is called, the English word for it is dint. Do you know what dint means, Shammai? Do you know what D-I-N-T? Do you know what dint means, Neve? No. Dint. Exactly. By way of, dint. By way of. So dint. That's all that. If you're buying something in this manner, you can also buy something else. Means to say, you don't need to acquire it by being in the courtyard. You're acquiring the field. By dint of acquiring the field, you can also acquire something else at the same time. You lump it in. Now, the trick is you have to have the intent to acquire it in this specific manner. Either way could possibly work, but you have had to have the idea that this is the kinyan method that I'm using. So Rabbi Gamliel wasn't transferring the property to Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Akiva by chotzer, by courtyard. He was doing it by agav, by dint. When we do the chometz, we do both. We actually do two other ways also. One is it needs to be in the courtyard, and one is it needs to be by dint of. Because I'm acquiring it by the field, I'm also acquiring it in this manner, just by dint of.
It's in the courtyard.
You just have to have the right intent of the way you're acquiring it. You could say, I'm acquiring it because it's in the courtyard, or I'm acquiring it.
It's only what's in the property at the time, sort of mutual.
No, the kinyan agav is saying nothing to do with the courtyard. It's saying because I'm buying the courtyard, at the same time I'm buying the courtyard, I'm also buying apples. I'm buying it at the same time.
Right. The movable property has to be there at the time you buy it.
No, it doesn't have to be in the courtyard. That's the point. It's nothing to do with the courtyard.
It has to be part of the property.
No, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be.
How do you find the property you're acquiring?
You're saying I'm buying a property and I'm also buying apples. And by dint of fact I can buy this property from you, I'm buying it. It's like, so that's what it's doing.
You have to specify.
Yeah, it's specified. It's a kinyan agav, yes.
So, just like connected to.
Yeah.
So, does it have to be a courtyard?
No, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't.
Just any.
Yeah.
Connecting it to any set.
Right, but it doesn't work in every circumstance. And not everyone accepts it in all. But that's the method that he was using here. I'm selling you the land, which I could sell, and by dint of the fact I'm selling you the land, I'm also selling you some other stuff. So it's nothing to do with the courtyard itself. So that's the way he was doing it. So, but you have to know what you're doing. So Rabbi Zera accepted this. Rabbi Abba Kibla. Rabbi Abba says, no way, I don't accept it. And Amirava Shapir Avid Dulo Kibla. So he said, no, he made a good move in not accepting it. Now, if you're going to just transfer it without it being in the courtyard, there's a different way you could have done it. You could have done it with what's called a kinyan chalipin, where you pick up the handkerchief and say, I'm giving you this handkerchief, and in exchange, you're giving me your apples. He could have acquired it that way. And so he said, do you think they didn't have a handkerchief? They could have given their handkerchief to Rabbi Gamliel. In exchange, he would have given them the apples. So rather, what's the reason why he wasn't able to give them the maestros by kinyan sudar? What's the reason why he wasn't able to do it? Because Rabbi Gamliel was not considered like he really owned the tithes yet. Why not? Because he only had with them what's called Tova Sana. Rabbi Akiva doesn't own the tithes. He has to give away these tithes to the Levite, to the poor, to the Kohen. So that's not considered ownership. That's just called the Tova Sana. He has the benefit of being able to give the gift to whoever he wants. Now that you can monetize that, but it's it's insignificant. It's not considered money. Tova sana ain't money. It's not considered money enough to be able to use it as a transaction. Tova sana ain't a mamon like no bechalipin. You can't use it to effectuate a transaction through chalipin because it's not tangible yet. And nachinami tova sana ain't a mamon like no sagabe karka. And so therefore you also can't use it to acquire it through agav. Through agav, it has to be something tangible. Gemara says, Velohi. That's not correct. It is something that's tangible. Matnas kahuna nesina ksibahu. It's not the case. The gifts to the Kohen are considered a gift. Chalipin derech memkar memkarhu, metalton agav mekarka nesina alimasehu. So we're saying, no, the gifts of the Kohen are considered a gift. And so since by tithe it says also nesina, therefore, you can't acquire them via chalipin because chalipin derech mekach memkarhu, and the chalipin is only acquired through sale. But agav metalton agav mikarka nisina limasahi. But nisina is actually going to be considered like it's stronger than. But to acquire a movable object through agav, that nisina is strong enough. So he could have used agav to acquire it through the gifts to the Kohen, even though he can't use it for chalipin. Rav Papa gives a different answer. He says the following: Rav Papa Amar. This goes back to what Harold was going towards. The reason why Rabbi Gamliel was able to give the tithes to the Chachamim without standing next to it was because because he was intending to give it. So there was a person involved, there was intent involved. Whereas with respect to the deer running through the field, there's nobody without any intent. And so that's the position that Rav Papa is adding in. Gemara says, where do we know this from? The Tanan, like we learned in our Mishnah, that if you saw the deer running after the lost object, then he says this field is acquired. That's where he's only after he's able to catch the deer. If he would be able to run after this broken deer, Ubai Rabbi Yirmiyah b'matana. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says, okay, what will be the law by a gift where you're intending to give him the deer? Hayach, what will be the law? And so Kabbalah Minei Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana. So Rabbi Abba says, I agree with your distinction that by a gift, you don't have to reach it. If it's just running through, then you need to be able to catch the deer in order to have, say your field acquires it. But by a gift, you don't even need to run after it to catch it. You automatically acquire it. Why? My timer. Just because the fact that you're able to run after it, the fact that somebody is giving it to you by a gift makes a different distinction. And normally Rav Shimon or Rav Papa, so he challenges how I get the das acheres makno son. But the case of a get, somebody's giving it to you, giving the woman the divorce, and Amar Ula Vushal Meves B'tzad Beisa B'tzad Chater, she needs to be standing there. Gemara says no, a get is a different type of kinyan. Shana get the Isa Bal Karcha. A get comes against her will. So Maska Rav Hashesh Spray Davidi Rav Kava Chomer it shouldn't be a proof. Stronger get should be for sure able to acquire. Ma get the Isabal Karcha get can be given to her even against her will. She needs to be standing there in order to acquire it. Matana de midaite will koshkein a gift that a person has to agree to for sure. He should need to be standing there in order to acquire it. Elam Ravashi. So therefore, Ravashi says Chatzer is Rabbi Mishum Yad. The reason why a courtyard works is not because of the agency, but because of the fact that it's an extension of your hand. And it's not it's not worse than the way of agency works. And so therefore it only works if a person wants it. Gabe matana dischusu by a gift, which is a merit, it works for him. But by a get, we assumed back in those days that the woman never wanted the divorce because she would be left on her own. So therefore she can't acquire against her will. but it means she needs to be standing next to it. But a gift, he wants it, so he has to be next to it. By the way, so this is the discussion. You see from here, there's an incredibly sophisticated analysis of what is the exact method of transferring property and agency. And obviously, this is a daf that you need to really spend a month on and not a day on in order to understand it. But that's Chodesh Adar. When the month of Adar comes in, Marbim is Simcha, Chodesh Tov to everybody. Yasher Koach.